Okay, brilliant. We'll make a start. So thank you for joining us. Today we're going to be talking about planning permission and light spill and answering your most frequently asked questions. Before we get started, just a little bit of basic webinar protocol for those of you who may not use Zoom in a while. So all of you are muted. It's only us, the presenters, who can speak. So if you've got any questions, please put them into the Q&A box. You can also say hello to us in the chat box, but please try and keep the questions in the Q&A. It just makes it easier for us to answer them as we go along. And after the webinar, we'll send out a link with a recording of the webinar. So anyone who'd like to rewatch it, or if you have any colleagues who this may be useful to, you can share that with them. And any resources that we mentioned during the webinar as well will be linked in that email. So today's agendas, first off, we'll do some introductions to our wonderful presenters. And for those of you who don't know us, a little bit about Midstream Lighting. And we'll go into the main presentation where we're going to answer questions like, do I need planning permission for LED floodlights? Who do I apply to? What information do I need to gather to start the process? And should I seek support from England Athletics? And then at the end, we've got 10 minutes for questions. So first off, my name's Sophie and I'm pleased to be your host. I am Head of Marketing here at Midstream Lighting and I'm joined by my colleague James. James, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm James, you probably see through a picture, James Brunt. I'm a director at Midstream Lighting with over 22 years of experience in sports lighting.
Wonderful. Thank you, James. And we are joined by the wonderful Ed. Ed, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, Sophie. Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my name's Ed Hunt. I am National Facilities and Planning Manager with England Athletics.
Wonderful. Great lineup today. So for those of you who don't know us, we're Midstream Lighting. We're an LED lighting solutions manufacturer. And we don't just sell products, we provide a whole solution. That's everything from at the very beginning to your plan of lights, so creating a lighting design, to any consultancy that you may need. So that's everything from planning permission to securing any funding you may need, to obviously delivering the products, installing them, and we can offer maintenance as well. And why we're joined by England Athletics is that we're really proud to be their official lighting partner. And we've been working together now for over 5 years, and we've done plenty of projects together. So now we're going to go into the main part of the presentation. So first off, James, do we need planning permission for LED floodlights? Could you tell us?
Yeah, so the simple answer is yes, you do. For any project in the UK, there's stringent planning rules around floodlighting. So the simple answer is yes, you do need planning permission. The simple thing to remember here is it doesn't matter if this is a retrofit or a new installation, that planning permission is still needed. And it's very, very key that as part of any sort of future plans that you should be taking some consideration around the environment, but also seeking some advice from your local authority, so your council. So really the important things to take into consideration here is the key factors affecting the need for permission. So typically that's the height of the floodlights, the number of floodlights which you need, the brightness of the floodlights. So that's determined by A, the wattage, and B, the lux level. The location, whether it's an urban, a rural, a suburban area, or even an area of outstanding natural beauty, which falls into then the environmental impact, because it could be things such as bats, crested newts, all these wonderful creatures that we have in our ecosystem, which could also impact lighting systems. And also objections from neighbours. We'll talk on this a little bit, which are around about light spillage and things around that. But yeah, objections from neighbours always has an impact on planning permission.
James, I'd just ask a question. If a track, an athletics track, has already got columns, already got maybe some aged lighting, if it's just a replacement and an upgrade to the lighting units, does that require planning permission?
Yeah, it does. It still requires planning permission, but what I would suggest on anything to do with this is if you're looking to do a retrofit of the existing floodlights, you've effectively got two options. option number one, depending on the wording of your planning permission, it may stipulate a number of floodlights, it may stipulate a light level, or even a type and brand of manufacturer. If it does that, then what you might need to do is you might need to apply for a change in your planning. So the first thing to do is to ultimately speak to your local authority. The local authority will give you some pre-application advice, which gives you a little bit of flexibility to have an open forum conversation with them. And there's no fees applied to that. There's a conversation as a user or a facilities manager that you can have with a local authority, and they will give you advice. But then the opposite side of it is that sometimes you do have the ability to switch floodlights from an existing system to a new system without having to reapply for planning. Because if your wording your planning application or planning permission states that you can have a lighting system to a certain lighting level, a certain height, and maybe a number of floodlights and a wattage, as long as you're not over exceeding those recommendations and that stipulation, then you can actually change the floodlights under a maintenance agreement, which then wouldn't impact your existing planning permission.
So to a degree, it depends on the original, what the term
Absolutely.
of the original planning was.
100%. That's what it all depends on. Depends on the wording of your planning permission. So the first thing to do is go back, check your planning permission, speak to us. We can help you with that. It's not a problem. We can check it. We can give some advice on it. It's free of charge advice. Or alternatively, speak to your local authority, who will also advise you. But yes, you do have the ability in some instances to replace the lights without having to reapply for planning. Okay. Do you want to move on to the next slide, please, Sophie?
Wonderful. So obviously you spoke a little bit about environmental zones, but can you tell us what are the environmental zones?
Yeah, so the table which you can see on this slide here is some documentation which has been put together by a wonderful group of people called the Institute for Lighting Professionals. I'm a member of the ILP and other organisations as well. The ILP basically are employed to try and produce better lighting systems, better knowledge around lighting, and effectively to support local authorities throughout the UK. And what they've done, and recently they've updated this guide, and they've basically set 4 key environmental zones within the UK. These are zone E0, E1, E2, E3, and E4. Forget about the zones and the numbers. What's really more importantly is you're either working in an area which has got an outstanding natural beauty, so it's a protected area. You might be in a natural environment, which is effectively the countryside, or even, again, a smaller area of outstanding beauty, a rural area, which is low business district usage, such as a village or a dark outer suburban location, a suburban location, which is classed as medium district brightness. And this is really set around most towns, town centres and suburban locations. And then the final really is the urban location, which is zone E4. This is what we would class as high district brightness. This could be a highly populated town, highly populated city, and everything which is beyond that. So in areas such as Nottingham city centre, Manchester city centre, London, these areas would class as a zone E4 for urban areas. But also you might have this in quite a busy town, such as somewhere like Milton Keynes or Reading. So they're the key things to consider.
James, just on the categorisation, obviously there's blurred lines between the various categories. So I might think where I live, I'm in rural, but I might actually be a little bit in E1. Is there a map or something that tells you, for example, a track, what area or what zone it's in?
No, there's no hard fast rule. If I'm brutally honest with you, that's really for us to try and if we're acting as a lighting consultant, we're helping and we're putting reports together to help for the submitting of planning applications and planning permission. Then that's something which you'd actually have as part of your pre-app with the local authority. So the local authority would effectively tell you, or should point you in a direction of what criteria you need to achieve.
Okay.
But most of the time we can ascertain that through Business Insight, through Google Earth, through mapping, through images, and trying to get a feel for it. Typically, you are right. A lot of places would fall in between maybe one, if not two categories. There's not always a straightforward answer. So for argument's sake, if you're living you could be on the edge of a town, but very close to the countryside, then yes, effectively you are going to fall in between a rural area and a suburban area. So really, if that's the case, then what we have to do is probably base the design around the best case scenario for the local authority, which effectively in that instance would be a rural area as opposed to a suburban area. But we may allow exceptions to the rule, but really the key thing is that, yeah, not everyone pigeonholes exactly into those 4 criterias. There is certain areas in the country which would slip between the two. But effectively, regardless, if you are seeking a new planning permission, a plan application, that this is something which you have to go through. And this is very, very key as part of the other slides in the presentation moving forward. Next slide then, please, Sophie.
Thanks, James. So who do we apply to for planning permission?
Okay, so local authority. That's straight away the easy answer. And your local council, they would effectively manage your plan application. That can be, in some instances, a parish council to start with. It can be a town council, may even be a city council. But in the first instance, what you need to do is have the conversation with your county. Typically, it wouldn't be county council who determine planning applications. It would be more your town, your parish, if you're in that area. So that's the key thing. The first thing to do is to speak to your local authority. There's also an online portal called the Planning Portal, and by putting your postcode entry in there, they should be able to give you some relative straightforward information and guidelines and procedures to follow.
James, who actually applies? So in the case of a track,
yeah,
you might have a club using it, but they have no security of tenure.
Yeah.
So if it's, let's say it's managed by a leisure trust who operate it on behalf of the local authority, who applies? The local authority, the leisure trust, the clubs may be party to the discussion, but they wouldn't apply, would they?
Yeah, it could actually be the club. I mean, in most instances, it should really be the club who do the application.
Okay.
For a small fee, we're prepared to act and do that on behalf of the clubs. There's also a potential opportunity as well for using something called an agent. So when you do a plan application, you can either be the landlord or the tenant, or you could be an agent. We would be classed as an agent because we're working on behalf of either the landlord or the tenant, or whoever the facility is. So any professional services will be classed as an agent, and we could do the application on behalf of the clubs or even the landlord, whoever really it is. But in the first instance, again, that would be pretty much clarified through doing a pre-application.
Wonderful. And what information do we need to gather to start the process? Okay,
so this is where really the process begins. And first things first is to engage with a lighting specialist. Hopefully Midstream would be chosen supplier or chosen specialist in this instance. But the important things to take into consideration is that you need to have done a lighting survey, put together a technical report. You need to have an OS map of a site. You need to have some more further technical information. You need to have details on the products, what you're looking to install, the type of floodlights, the wattage of the floodlights. You need to have a lighting study done, which is a lighting plan, which the lighting manufacturer will be able to do for you. And also other information as well, such as height of masts, type of masts, things like this, which all incorporate as part of the of the application, and this should be accompanied with a technical report effectively detailing all of this. Some planning authorities may ask for some additional information, things such as will it impact the noise, will it impact on things such as traffic, and all different management plans which may be asked for, but most of the time with an application purely on floodlighting, it's typically only asked for lighting related information to be provided. Okay, happy to move on to the next slide, Sophie, if you've got it ready.
Okay, and how do we prepare a planning application?
Okay, so first instance, go onto the planning portal, which I mentioned earlier on. That will give you the steer to the correct planning authority. Then have a conversation, pick up the phone or even email, book a consultation with a planning authority. This is classed as a pre-application, which is a non-committal conversation where you can seek advice from a local authority and they will tell you what their minimum requirements are and expectations are for a new planning application. Or even if you're looking to do a retrofit lighting installation where you are modifying the scheme, then again, they will do this as a free of charge pre-application advice, and they will give you the details of really what they're looking to achieve and how to achieve it to some degree, and where you go to start making this application, and also how much the application will cost. But again, as I said, this is something we can assist with. By going through the planning portal or the local authorities portal, they will have a standard template which you complete as part of the planning application. They will also ask you to supply supporting evidence and information, which I just discussed a few minutes ago, which is typically the type of light, the design for the lighting system, the height of the mast, the number of masts, and the lighting level as well. So they're the key things. And then they're asking for a statement, typically of why you want a lighting system, the benefits to it, the justification. Sometimes as well by speaking to the facilities managers within England Athletics. If you're looking at a new application, they would look to probably give a letter of support for something like this. And also sports governing bodies such as Sport England, they may even be consulted as part of this process as well. But the key points to address are the justification for why you want a new lighting installation or potentially an upgrade, the benefits of a new lighting system, the measures that you've taken to mitigate any negative impact, which the lighting specialist will be able to help you with, and also consideration for any alternative solutions. It's always good to have this, not even if you present it as part of the first application, because typically as part of a planning application, there may be a degree of negotiation. And if that is the case, then it's always good to have a creative solution in the back pocket should there be a level of objections against your original plan application. Okay, happy for you to move on, Sophie.
Wonderful. So it's James kind of touched on it, but should we be seeking support from England Athletics with our installation?
Yeah, in short, always good to consult the governing body, which is us, before any project, lighting, track resurface, whatever. I guess the good thing about working with you guys for 5 years is you know what our standards are. So that's a real positive for people who use you, is you know what standards we expect in terms of lighting. And those are published standards. They're on the slides now. So there's 3 standards that are recognised by Sport England and recognised by us as England Athletics. So training and rec use, club level, and national events. So your national events you tend to be the televised events. So you're probably looking at Birmingham, Manchester and London. And primarily the increased lux level is for TV coverage. So you get a clear picture. We, if it was a new track and a new lighting, we would always recommend a club level 200 lux with 0.5 uniformity. James, I know I'll talk about uniformity in a little while. But we recognise that that's not practical for every venue. So planning considerations, cost, etc., can make that a challenge. So we do have a lesser standard for training and recreational use, which is 100 lux and above. And even below that, we have some tracks that are just tracks for running, jogging tracks, essentially, where that can be dropped further to sort of 50 lux, but we wouldn't recommend that. So yeah, we do have standards. If you use Midstream, they know our standards. If you happen to use another lighting provider, these are the standards that we would expect them to achieve. In terms of the uniformity, we get as part of the track mark accreditation, the lights are inspected every 3 years. While some venues do achieve the minimum lux levels, if there are dark spots, if there are lights that are out, the uniformity, i.e. the difference between the highest light and the lowest light level, which gives you a uniformity ratio, if that's out, then it means there's potentially concern. So if the uniformity wasn't good across the infield, our official's going to spot things falling out of the sky, such as javelins, hammers, discus, etc. So it's really important, primarily from a safety perspective, but also aesthetically, for that we have the right levels and the right uniformity. Glare, I think, well, James is more qualified to talk about that than me, but again, sort of spotting, officials particularly spotting implements coming out of the sky. If the lights aren't positioned correctly, then that can potentially become an issue for both athletes and officials. Yeah, and planning authorities, Sport England, etc., as James has rightly said, are consulted on this stuff. So we will revert to this our recognised standards. So we'll say, does the lighting plan, do the lights meet this standard? So it is really important that you engage with us at an early stage, and also with your preferred contractor, in this case, Midstream.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ed. So James, we've kind of spoken about it, but what is light spill?
Okay, so the diagram to your right is the best way of, on the slide, to describe light spill. So we have multiple different types of light spill. We have upwards light, we have backwards light. Upwards light is typically when lights aren't aimed correctly, or even the wrong technology is used, and that effectively creates the halo effect, which you sometimes see at the sports venues. Backlight typically is the light which comes out the rear of a floodlight. So again, that's something which you can mitigate, but it's something you will always have. There's something called task light, which effectively is the amount of light which comes out of a product, out of a floodlight, down onto the field of play or onto the athletic surface. And then you have reflectance light. Reflectance light effectively redirects off of the floor up into the atmosphere. And all of these things effectively contribute to spill light. Now, spill light is something that you will always have as part of any floodlighting system, but what you have to do is mitigate it the best you possibly can by choosing the right height of the mast, the right power of floodlights, the right aiming, the right technology, and if all of those things are done correctly, then that should minimize the amount of light intrusion which is into any properties, any windows which are nearby to the field of play. But the important thing is to consider, as part of the consideration here, is that you've got a very bright lighting system on effectively the sports field. You are always going to have a degree of light which you can't do a great deal about. So you've got to make sure that the design is carried out site specifically, so that you can take into consideration the local neighbours. The other things to take into consideration as well is that if the light isn't aimed correctly and the right technology hasn't been used, then you are going to have a huge amount of source intensity. That's effectively the amount of light that you can see, and also direct glare, which is effectively the discomfort value which you would have from a light. So the best way to describe it, a very high glary insulation is the same as driving your car down a country road at night and somebody driving towards you with the headlights on. Glare is exactly that, is that if you've got that dazzle effect, that's how that is managed and also monitored. So really, with all those things taken into consideration, what you've got to do is bear all the causes effectively, and the impacts of these is that if you don't aim the lights correctly and don't have a right technology, but you are going to get complaints from neighbours. You will get disruption to wildlife. There is a lot of energy wastage, a lot of light which is not going to the right areas, which is causing and especially now with the cost of energy, is that that's causing major problems and huge energy bills for something which could be sorted by the right technology or the right aiming of lights. And the sky glow, I mentioned it earlier on, poorly lit sporting installations have this big halo effect on them. You can see them from miles. You can see this orange or white glow above the field of play, and effectively it is affecting the group of campaigners for dark skies and seeing the stars and also any wildlife which is up in the sky.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, James. So how can we avoid light spill?
Okay, so again, this comes down to design. This comes down to the product, and it comes down to the lighting manufacturer and the lighting specialist. Using asymmetric optics means that you can directly light the area which is needed, not the area responding. Beyond it, not respond, beyond it. Ensure correct aiming. So the aiming of the floodlights needs to be as per the lighting guidance, the lighting design, which is completed by the lighting manufacturer. So the floodlights should be angled down onto the field of play, onto the track, and not up into the sky. Increasing mounting heights is also important as well, because that reduces the impact of a light. So many people think that it's better to have shorter lighting columns, shorter lighting masts. The truth is, no, that's the worst possible thing, because all you do is tilt the light up into the sky, which actually increases the amount of light spill. The best thing you can do is have a higher mast, and that limits the amount of spill light and it controls the light. Consider curfews, so switch off lights where they're not needed. Local authorities might stipulate the lights need to be off at 9 o'clock, 10 p.m. at night. So please apply with this in mind as part of the application. But more importantly, using luminaires with shielding, hoods, baffles, cowls, which we provide as a manufacturer, and that prevents nuisance light. It makes sure that the light goes into the right designated areas, which is what we're designed to do. Use LED floodlights with smart controls. We use DALI, we use DMX. That doesn't mean a lot to a number of people on this call, but what it does mean to us is it gives us a flexibility to be able to switch the floodlights into cycles. So you could switch the lighting from a competition and club standard down to training standard. You may have 100 lux straight, which you're just running in that evening. Turn the lights down to that one area. Save on money, but also save on the environment as well. And also regular maintenance and adjustment is really important, because if you don't maintain your lights, then there is potential that the lights might move out of position, which causes further nuisance lights, but also it could take the project out of specification as well. So it's important to maintain and clean your lights, at least at the very worst case scenario, every 2 years, ideally every 1 year.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, James. Thank you, Ed. That was really useful. So now we're going to answer some questions. We've had a couple come in as we've been going along. But if anyone's got any questions, now's the time to ask. Please pop them into the Q&A box and we will answer them. So we're going to do questions for another 5 or 10 minutes. We'll see how we get on. So our first question for James. James,
Yeah,
how tall can the floodlight columns be without requiring special approval?
that's a really good question. Once upon a time, there used to be a stipulation that you could have lighting columns of 4 meters and under, which didn't need planning permission. Recent rules have changed, so really any height lighting should really be falling under the planning application and planning permission. But to actually answer the question a little bit further, I suppose, is the height of a mast is always determined by the lighting design. Because what you want to do is, if this is a brand new installation, is have something which commercially makes sense and also is site specific. So typically around an athletics track, you may have 8 15-meter masts, which can be positioned with 6 masts effectively along the straights and 2 on each bend. That is probably the most optical way of doing a lighting installation and probably the most cost effective. But in some instances, it may mean that you can't do that because of the layout of the site. So it might mean you need to have 4 masts, which effectively then creates something which is a little bit like a football stadium, which is putting one in each corner. And to get the right mounting height of the floodlights and a minimal amount of light spill, that might mean you need a height of somewhere over and above 20 meters. It could even be 25 meters. Not many of those installations in the UK. Typically, you might see that as somewhere where Ed mentioned earlier on, like Manchester or Sheffield or Birmingham or London. But in some instances, you might need that because your site doesn't allow you to do that. If you are going to have a lower specification, such as 100 lux, which is training, and which Ed mentioned may be acceptable, maybe even a lower level than that because of site restrictions or plan application, then you could effectively light the track like a street light. And that's by having multiple 4, 5, 6 meter lighting columns all the way around the track, and effectively a street light on the top of a lighting column. Yes, it means there's a lot of lights to go around there, but it's actually directing the light directly onto the track and the area in front of it, but also can get around some difficult planning laws should they be implemented. So hoping that kind of answers the question.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Our next question, I think you covered this, but I'll just ask it again. How can we find which environmental zone we fall into?
Okay, so first and foremost, speak to us. We can provide you with documentation. Otherwise, if you visit the Institute for Lighting Professionals website, so the ILP, they have all the guidelines on there. Or otherwise, if you speak to your local authority, they will give you the documentation as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Our next question, is bug rating required to mention in specification for floodlights to avoid spill light?
No, not particularly. No. If you're talking in relation to insects in bug, then no, it wouldn't be considered. But what we'll typically find is if there is something around wildlife, the environment, what sometimes will happen is as part of an application, when you put your initial application in, if it's an area of concern for the local authority, then they would speak to you about some additional reports which may be required. So a number of plan applications at the moment which I'm working on have issues around bats. And bats, although they're blind, they cause some significant problems for sports installations and certainly lighting installations, because typically where sports fields are is usually in a bit more of a greener field, an open space, typically with trees around it. And what we find is that a lot of the time this is a nesting area and fly routes for bats. So what we may be asked for is a bat survey as part of a planning application. The same thing can happen for insects, for crested newts, and many other species which are available. But typically, as part of your application for planning, then this will be something which is requested by the planning officer.
Brilliant, thank you. Our next question, if we already have planning permission, but we're replacing columns like for like, do we still need to reapply for planning permission?
If the masts are going to go in exactly the same location, and depending on the wording of the planning permission, then it's quite possible that you don't need a new planning application. In the first instance, consult with us. We can check the recommendation, we can check the planning permission, and we can feed back. Secondly, if that's not good enough, or if it's further information needed, then speak to your planning authority as part of a pre-application. Some instances, yes, you can remove a mast, you can replace them in the exact same position, the same height, and the same lighting level, and you could argue that you don't need a new planning application because this is done under maintenance. But if you are to move the location of the masts, the height of the mast, change the physical type or look of a mast, then really our recommendation would be to seek advice from a planning authority, and quite potentially it's a new planning application, yes.
Brilliant, thank you very much. Our next question, will higher CCT, so correlated color temperature, like 6,000 Kelvin, have caused more light spill in the environment due to scattering?
No, so typically Higher. Okay, this is a really good question, actually. So the higher the color temperature, the higher the CCT, the higher the Kelvin, is better for broadcasting. So if you've got an international venue, if you've got a high spec sports venue, so if it's a stadium rather than a recreation or community level facility, then if it's being used for broadcasting, then higher color temperature is better. 6,000 is not something I would use really for sport, because it's too high, it's too bright in terms of the whiteness. For broadcasting, we would recommend somewhere between 5,000 and 5,700 Kelvin. If you're going to use a lower color temperature of something, let's say between 3,000, 4,000 and 5,000, 5,000 is the norm. In the UK, that's the norm. And in fact, around the world, it's the norm for sports lighting installations. If you're using a lower color temperature of, let's say, 4,000 Kelvin or 3,000 Kelvin, or some people even ask for 2,700 Kelvin, which isn't particularly used for sport. What that means is that you're actually potentially going to lose the lumen output from the floodlight itself, which actually can mean that you need to use more floodlights, even though the lights aren't as bright in terms of a color appearance to light the area. And if you've got more light, that typically means that you have more light spillage. So the two go hand in hand. So really, if you go to the highest level, then that's really broadcaster related. Typically, the norm is somewhere between 4,000 to 5,700 Kelvin, and that's not going to impact the lighting, the light spill. But if you're using something below 5,000, sorry, below 4,000 or below, then the argument would be that you potentially have to use more lights to meet the specification. And if you're using more lights, then typically that's a higher degree of light spill.
Okay, brilliant. That's actually all the questions. So if anyone has got anything, please pop it in the box quickly, and we will answer it. But in the meantime, I will just mention together we created a lighting guide, which takes you through how to measure your lighting, obviously the lighting levels that Ed mentioned, and the required level. So you can download a copy of the guide. I'll include it in the email that I send out with a link to the recording. A great bit to test your own lighting and make sure everything is working correctly. And obviously, if you're going for track mark certification as well, there's some handy tips in there. In the meantime, we have just had one more question come in. So James, is there a CCT minimum for visually impaired users?
Great question. And honestly, right now, without searching the guidelines, I couldn't tell you, because it's not something, it's not a standard question, actually. It's not something which is regularly asked of me. So it's something we'd have to do some research into. But what I would suggest that if it is the case, then typically it would be a higher spec Kelvin, which is required. So really 5,000 would be the best. But yeah, I mean, if somebody wants to email me on that directly, then I can certainly speak to the necessary members of the correct organisations and come back with a definite answer on that.
Yeah, definitely. And we did actually do a CCT webinar in our aviation sector a couple of weeks ago. And our technical director, Paolo, is very knowledgeable on that. So we can ask him as well. So we will get back to you on that with just a bit more information. But that's all we've got time for. We've done our 10 minutes on the mark. A big thank you to all of you for joining us, and a huge thank you as well to Ed and James.